In part 1, we saw how to get our ball moving, and we saw how it came to fall off the bottom of the screen. Here's where we left things, with the ball here shown as an empty circle off the bottom of the screen. Now that this has happened, what should we do? Well, we know what we want to do. Looking at the orange circle, we have a little red arrow pointing down. That's SY. That's how much it has just moved down after we did the assignment statements. What we want to do is to turn that around. So now that points up. If we add these two arrows to the original location, then we bounce up and to the right. And this would be our new spot, and we would draw the new circle. And now CX points to the right and CY points up. So in the next frame, we will have the same thing. So we move up and to the right, and we draw the new circle, and so on. So now that we know what we want to have happen, how do we detect it? Here's the picture at the moment where we need to bounce. Now we know how tall the screen is. The distance from the top of the screen to the bottom is stored in the global variable height. Remember, this is a global that processing is maintaining for us based on our call to size. And like most of processing's globals, it begins with a lowercase h. So the value of height is the very lowest point where we want the ball to go. Where is the ball now? Well, after we add SY to CY, the ball is below the bottom of the screen. In other words, CY is now greater than height. Well, that's the trick. That's what we're going to test for. Here's the value of height located at the bottom of the screen, and on the right-hand side, we see the value of CY. Remember that we measure from the top of the graphics window. So from the top to the bottom, we start at 0, we work our way down, we hit height, and then we keep going down and we hit CY. In other words, CY is greater than height. That's the test. So let's go ahead and use it. I'll open up the code a little bit and I'll put in a test that says if CY is greater than height, we're going to do something. We're going to make a bounce. So again, let's remind ourselves of what we want. We want to take SY, the little red arrow that's pointing down, and flip it around so it's pointing up. So if SY was 5, that means that the ball moved down 5 pixels every frame. If we now make it -5, adding that to the center will cause the ball to move up on every frame. So let's do that. We'll open up the code a little bit, and we'll just say SY is -SY. We're almost done, but not quite, and here comes the interesting subtlety. Notice that now we have already moved the ball, right? That's why CY is greater than height. The ball, if we drew it now, would not even appear on the screen because it's below the bottom of the screen. What we really want to do is to undo the move we just made and then move properly up and to the right instead. There are lots of ways to do this, but here's the way that I think is simplest. We'll take the ball where it is now, the empty circle at CY, and we'll simply move it up by SY twice. If I add SY, the new SY, remember now it's pointing up. If I add SY to CY, it will put the ball vertically where it was at the beginning of the frame. If I add it again, now I'm moving up twice, or I'm moving the ball up the way I wish I had in the first place. This can be a little bit tricky if this is the first time that you're thinking about these kinds of things. And if it's not immediately obvious to you that this makes sense, don't worry about it. Play around with this, draw some little pictures for yourself, or better yet, write a few little toy processing routines and experiment with what happens when a ball hits, say, the bottom of the screen, and try messing around with things. And you'll discover that what I've just described solves the problem. Then you can come back to this video and watch the sequence we just did, and I think it'll make even more sense to you. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's add SY to the center Y twice. So I'll open up the code a little bit. I'll add SY to CY once, moving it up, and then I'll add it in again, moving it up a second time, and now the ball is where we want it. Notice that we are repeating this line twice. CY plus equals SY, CY plus equals SY. So we're adding SY to CY 2 times. Well, we can replace this with one line. CY plus equals 2 times SY. Generally, I think that's a nicer way to go. There's no reason to repeat that line twice. It takes up room. It's a place where you could make a typo. Less is more. So let's get rid of those two lines that are identical and replace them just with this one line that does the same thing. And that does the trick. That bounces us off the bottom of the screen. Let's try this out. So here we are in Draw, and I'm just going to put in exactly what we discussed. If CY is greater than height, then something, and we know what the something is. We're going to turn the ball around, and then we're going to move the ball back up. Let's see if that works. I'll run it. The ball should move down and to the right and bounce. Well, that's perfect. And now, of course, it disappears off the top because we haven't handled that. We handle the other four walls with exactly the same strategy. Just a little bit of the geometry changes. Here we are getting ready to bounce off the top of the screen. In the last frame, the circle was in the orange position. We've just added CY, and because the Y component of our speed, SY, is negative, we're moving up on every frame. And we've moved up above the top of the screen. And of course, the top of the graphics window is at 0. So our test is to find out if CY is less than 0. If it is, then we want to bounce again. So let's put that in the code. I'll open up the code and we'll just say if CY is less than 0, then something. What's the something? Well, it's almost the same thing as before. What we want to do is to turn the thing around so that the vertical speed, the red arrow, flips around. So now it's pointing down. And now we need to fix the position of the ball, which is currently above the window. So we need to add SY to it once to move it down and a second time to move it to the new position. So let's do that. We'll open up the code. I'll flip around SY and then I'll say, hey, I need to move the circle downwards to this location to get it back to where it was at the start. So we'll stick that into the code and then I'll move the circle down again. This is where I want it to be and I'll add that line to the code. Of course, we're adding SY to CY twice, just like before. We say, hey, we can just do it with one line. So let's clear away those two lines and use just the one line to add 2 times SY. I think that should work. Let's try it out. So here's our code, and I'll say if CY is less than 0, SY equals minus SY, and CY plus equals 2 times SY, moving everything around. Let's run it, and now we should bounce off the bottom. Very nice. And we should bounce off the top. Great. And now we disappear off the right-hand edge. So we need to fix that. Of course, the strategy is the same. Before we handle the top and the bottom, notice something very interesting. The 2 lines that we execute when we disappear off the bottom of the screen are identical to the 2 lines we execute when we go off the top of the screen. We've repeated these lines. First of all, there's no need for that. I mean, it just makes our program longer. It would be nice if we could somehow get rid of this redundancy. But more important than the length of the program is trying to make sure that you never repeat yourself. Suppose something was wrong with our logic. Now, nothing is, but suppose we had this wrong, and we needed to add 3 times SY to CY. So we think, okay, I need to fix the code. We find the first 2, we fix that to a 3, and now it bounces correctly off the bottom, but not off the top. Now this program is small, but if the program was big, we could spend a long time trying to track down that other 2 until we realize, oh, we're doing the same thing twice. They both have to become 3s. In general, don't repeat. Avoiding repetition is just a really good strategy for keeping your code clean, easier to write, easier to maintain, easier to debug. Well, we know that these 2 blocks of lines are the same. So what differentiates them? It's the if test. In one of them, we're testing if CY is greater than height. In the other one, we're testing if CY is less than 0. But if either of these 2 conditions are true, we are going to do the exact same thing. So let's test for both of them at one time. I'll just say if either CY is greater than height, wrap that in parentheses, 2 vertical bars, remember that means or. CY is less than 0. If we're either below the bottom or above the top, then we want to bounce. And the code in the yellow box is our bouncing code. So I'll just reuse the code we already have. I'll take the first if statement, I'll blow it away, I'll put this if statement in its place, and now that's all we need. In fact, we can get rid of the whole second if statement and all of its tests. In part 3, we'll run this code to test it out, and then handle bouncing off the left and right sides of the graphics window.